I watched a really rich man's girlfriend hit a waitress and rip the clothes right off the manager. Everyone else in the room just froze up stiff with fear. My little girl, Sophie, held my hand so tight she was shaking. That raw fear brought back every bad memory of my cruel in-laws. Something inside me snapped. What I did next changed everything, and it's how I ended up with the billionaire wanting me. My name is Naomi, and this is my story. You have to stick around for this. It has twists you won't believe are true. This story is about a single mom finding the courage she needed, the strange choice a rich man made, and getting payback that will leave you speechless. Before we begin, write your name and where in the world you are watching from in the comments below. I'm 28 years old, and I am a single mom to Sophie, the best 6-year-old girl you could ever meet. If you saw me walking down the street, you just see a tired woman trying to handle too much work and too many bills. And you'd be right. I work 2 jobs. At a little coffee shop during the day and helping kids with schoolwork in the evenings. It is exhausting, but this is the life I built all by myself, starting from nothing. 2 years ago, my husband died in a car crash. But honestly, I felt like I had lost him much earlier than that. Our marriage was never easy or fun. It was just about surviving each day. The worst part wasn't even him. It was his family. My in-laws hated me from the start. They didn't think I was good enough because I came from a poor family. My mother-in-law would stare at me with pure hate, like I was just something dirty she stepped on and needed to wipe off her shoe. She called me terrible names: useless, trash, worthless. Even now I still hear those ugly words in my head when I wake up in the middle of the night. The physical abuse was the absolute worst part. She would hit me for tiny silly mistakes. Burn the toast slightly? Slap. Did I forget to iron a shirt perfectly? Slap. Sometimes she hit me for no reason at all, just to remind me I was beneath her. I remember one day she grabbed my favorite simple dress and just ripped it right off my body, yelling that it was too cheap and made the family look bad. My husband never helped me. He just looked down at the floor, too scared of his own mother to say a single word in my defense. They didn't wait long after the funeral. Within a week they kicked Sophie and me out of the house. They said I brought bad luck. They actually said I killed their son. Can you imagine hearing that when you've already lost everything? But I didn't let myself fall apart. I couldn't. I had Sophie to live for. So, I took what little I had, found a small cheap apartment, and we started over. Every single day has been a hard fight, but we make it work. Sophie is safe and happy, and that's the only thing that matters. I swore to myself right then that no one would ever treat me like trash again. I promised I would never stay silent again. This leads us to 3 months ago, the night that changed my life forever. My best friend Lucy had been planning her birthday celebration for weeks. She insisted on taking Sophie and me to this really expensive restaurant called Lumiere. I tried hard to say no. A place like that costs more money than I earn in a whole week. But Lucy wouldn't let me refuse. She knew how hard I worked, and she just wanted me to have one special, nice night. I finally agreed, mostly because I wanted Sophie to feel special too. She deserved that treat. The day of the dinner, Sophie was bubbling with excitement. Talking a mile a minute about the sparkling lights. When we stepped inside Lumiere, the noise level dropped immediately. It was a hushed, heavy kind of silence, the kind that makes you afraid to talk too loud. Everything was polished, dark wood, reflecting the sharp white light of the chandeliers. I felt exposed immediately, wearing my simple black dress. I felt poor and I hated that feeling. Lucy tried to make me feel better, laughing loudly as we were shown to a small table tucked away near a decorative fountain. We had just settled in, Sophie delightedly stirring the lemon in her water, when the room seemed to shift. The flow of waiters and diners stopped. Standing in the entrance was Harrison Cole, the tech giant, famous for his severe wealth and sudden disappearance from the public eye. Beside him stood Clarissa Montgomery. She was striking, almost unreal, draped in a pale silk dress that looked impossibly expensive. But her beauty was cold. Her face was perfectly composed, but her eyes, when they scanned the room, held nothing but sharp judgment. They were led to a massive circular table in the center of the dining room, a spot designed for display. A young woman, a waitress who looked barely older than 20, was assigned to their table. Her name was Jenny. I noticed immediately how nervous she was. Her hands shook slightly as she poured water for the massive party. Clarissa didn't look at Jenny, not once, but her presence radiated intense scrutiny. Then it happened. Jenny reached across the table to place a bread basket, and her elbow clipped the edge of a water glass. It wasn't a huge spill, just a few drops of ice water hitting the crisp white tablecloth and running onto the marble floor with a quiet, icy tink. The sound cut through the silence like a gunshot. Clarissa stopped talking mid-sentence. Her smile vanished. She looked down at the drops of water, then slowly raised her gaze to Jenny. The change in her demeanor was shocking. It was not annoyance, it was pure targeted contempt. "Did you just do that?" Clarissa's voice was low, clear, and perfectly flat. It carried easily in the suddenly quiet restaurant. Jenny immediately went white. "Oh, I am so sorry, Miss Montgomery. I will clean that right up." "Don't touch it," Clarissa ordered. "Look at it. Look at the mess you made. This is why people like you should never be allowed in a setting like this. You have no respect for nice things, or for the money that pays for them." The verbal attack continued, weaving in and out of insults about Jenny's intelligence, her clumsiness, and her general worthlessness. Harrison, across from Clarissa, hadn't even looked up yet. He was staring intently at his phone, already checked out of the moment. The pressure built until Jenny was crying silently, tears tracking down her cheeks as she stood frozen, clutching a napkin. I wanted to move, to say something, but the years of training, the fear of making the situation worse, kept me in my seat. Lucy was whispering, "Don't, Naomi, don't," under her breath. Clarissa wasn't finished. She stood up abruptly, making her chair scrape the floor. "Pathetic," she hissed. She took one step toward Jenny. Before anyone could react, Clarissa's hand moved in a swift, sickening arc. The sound of the slap, a sharp, wet crack, was amplified by the silence of the restaurant. Jenny stumbled backward, dropping the napkin dispenser. She didn't cry out, but the red imprint of Clarissa's hand immediately started to bloom across her cheek. A woman in a sharp black suit, Patricia, the restaurant manager, rushed over. Patricia moved with efficient professionalism, trying desperately to defuse the ticking bomb. "Ma'am, I apologize deeply for the inconvenience," Patricia said, keeping her voice steady. "Please allow me to handle this. We will ensure this is cleaned up, and Jenny will be disciplined." Clarissa turned her fury onto the manager. "Disciplined? Are you deaf? This isn't a mistake, it's a failure of standards. And you are the manager. Your fault too. I want her fired. And I want you fired. Both of you." Patricia tried to maintain her composure. "With respect, ma'am, we have protocols for minor spills." Clarissa's eyes narrowed. She lunged forward, grabbing the lapel of Patricia's suit jacket, ripping the fabric down the front seam until the manager's shirt was exposed. "Protocols?" Clarissa spat the word out like poison. "My protocol is that I don't want to see your cheap, disgusting faces here ever again. You are nothing but garbage." The sound of the tearing fabric was terrible. It was loud and violent and completely unnecessary. At our small table, Sophie made a tiny choked sound. Her face was buried in my arm, her 6-year-old body shaking with silent fear. Her small hand gripped mine so hard I could feel the bones pressing together. The word garbage. The sound of tearing clothes. Sophie's fear. It was like a switch flipping, or perhaps a dam finally breaking. The luxurious restaurant faded. I wasn't sitting at Lumiere anymore. I was back in the cold, perfect marble kitchen of my in-laws' mansion. The heavy scent of antiseptic cleaner and fear filled the air. My mother-in-law was standing over me, her face contorted in the same mask of entitlement I was seeing on Clarissa's face. "You clumsy mistake. You are costing us money. You are just garbage, Naomi. Dirty, useless garbage." I felt the sudden shocking pressure of her hand gripping the fabric of my favorite simple cotton dress. The one modest thing I owned that felt like mine. I heard the sharp, cruel sound of the seam ripping apart as she tore it clean off my body, humiliating me completely, leaving me exposed and shaking on the cold floor while my husband stared at his shoes, silent, weak, and useless. The shame was a physical weight, pressing me into the floor, a weight I had carried for years. The flashback hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing my breath. But unlike the young girl I had been, the girl who curled up and took the abuse, the 28-year-old mother snapped back to the present, powered by something fierce and molten hot. I looked down at Sophie. Her face was pressed into my side, her small fist still gripping my arm, soaking in the horrifying lesson that people with money could treat people without it like dirt, and everyone would just stay silent. I swore to myself I would never be silent again. Not for me. And definitely not for Sophie. I would not allow my daughter to witness this and learn the terrible lesson that cruelty goes unpunished. I would not let her see her mother be a coward. The years of repressed rage, the humiliations, the slaps, the tears, the feeling of being called garbage so many times I almost believed it, all broke through the surface. It wasn't fear that coursed through me now. It was a cold, sharp, demanding determination. Clarissa was still standing over Patricia and Jenny, her mouth moving, ready to deliver another cutting line. She reached out again, seemingly intending to push the manager back, to add one more physical humiliation. I stood up. My chair scraped against the polished floor, the sound loud and abrasive enough to finally cut through Clarissa's monologue. The movement was slow, deliberate, and final. Every single person in the massive dining room looked toward our small, tucked-away table. I took a deep breath, planting my feet firmly on the marble floor, determined to face the monster head-on. The time for whispering was over. I took a deep breath, planting my feet firmly on the marble floor, determined to face the monster head-on. The time for whispering was over. Clarissa was leaning in, her face contorted in a mask of pure, ugly contempt. Her hand was raised again, not just a threat now, but an inevitable punishment she felt entitled to deliver. This time it was aimed at Patricia's shoulder, a final shove before she demanded the manager's removal. I moved forward 2 quick strides, closing the gap. My hand shot out and clamped around Clarissa's pale, bony wrist. The sudden grip froze Clarissa in place, her momentum dying instantly. The shock on her face was absolute. The kind of surprise you only see when someone who believes they are untouchable is finally touched. "Stop," I said. My voice was low, surprisingly steady, but edged with the cold steel of years of buried fury. Clarissa blinked twice, pulling back slightly, trying to free her wrist from my grasp. She looked at my simple borrowed dress, then at my face, and her rage immediately shifted from the staff to me. "Let go of me, you piece of trash," she hissed, her voice struggling to stay below a shout, though the whole room was now listening. "Who the hell are you? You think you can touch me? I'll have you sued for assault. I'll make sure you lose whatever miserable job you cling to. You won't just be fired, you'll be ruined. You have no idea who I am." Her threats were fast and sharp, designed to inspire immediate terror. They sounded horribly familiar. A dark echo of the voices that had tormented me and called me garbage for years. But those voices had no power here, not anymore. Not in front of Sophie. I tightened my grip slightly, feeling the thin pulse beating rapidly beneath my fingers. "I know exactly who you are," I replied, allowing the pain of my past to sharpen my focus. "You are a bully who thinks money buys the right to treat human beings like dirt." I looked pointedly at Jenny, still shaking and holding her face, and then at Patricia, whose uniform gaped where Clarissa had ripped it. "You spilled a drop of water," I continued, my eyes locked on Clarissa. "A mistake. You responded by physically assaulting and humiliating 2 women. That is not authority. That is sickness. And it ends now." Clarissa gasped, not because of the words, but because she recognized that the person speaking was not afraid. She tried to yank her arm away again, but I held firm. Her face turned red with frustration. "You're pathetic," Clarissa sneered, finally freeing her hand in a sudden jerk. She raised her palm, aiming for my cheek with the exact same motion she had used on Jenny moments before. It was an instinctual response when threatened, destroy the threat. But I was ready. I wasn't weak, scared Naomi anymore. I caught her wrist midair, blocking the strike. I felt the soft impact against the heel of my own hand. For a split second our hands were tangled, suspended in the tense air between us. Then with a speed that startled even me, I rotated my wrist and brought my other hand across her face. It was not a wild swing born of blind passion, but a measured, definitive strike. Smack. The sound was not loud, but it was incredibly sharp. It cracked through the expensive silence of the Lumiere dining room like a gunshot. Clarissa froze. Her beautiful, icy mask shattered. Her head snapped back, a bright red welt instantly forming on her cheekbone. She stood there, completely still, eyes wide with incomprehension. The air went thick, completely devoid of sound. No clinking of silverware, No whispered conversation, nothing. I kept my voice loud enough for the entire room to hear, cutting through the silence I had just created. That is what assault feels like, I told her, my chest heaving slightly. And unlike your childish fit, mine has witnesses. About 50 of them. And I guarantee the security cameras in this establishment just recorded you assaulting 3 different people. Jenny, Patricia, and now me. I stepped back, allowing her stunned body to sway slightly. I pointed to the restaurant manager, who was watching with horrified awe. Do not let her leave, I ordered Patricia, my tone shifting into something authoritative I hadn't known I possessed. Call the police immediately. File charges for assault and battery against this woman. We have dozens of witnesses and clear video evidence. Clarissa finally started to move, sputtering incoherent threats, touching the hot mark on her face. It was at that moment that Harrison Cole, the man who owned half the city's technology, finally put his phone down. He had been leaning back in his chair, seemingly disconnected from the immediate drama, conducting business through an earpiece. The moment of absolute silence following the slap had broken through his professional detachment. He looked at Clarissa, red-faced and raging. Then he looked at me, a woman in a simple dress standing firm over the victimized staff demanding justice. His gaze was intense, analytical. He saw the fire in my eyes, the integrity in my posture. It wasn't just a fight. It was a stand. Harrison slowly pushed his chair back and stood up. He was tall and commanding, his sudden entry into the conflict instantly changing the power dynamic. He walked past Clarissa without looking at her, placing himself directly between her and me. He addressed the stunned crowd, his voice carrying the effortless authority of immense wealth and power. Security, Harrison called out sharply. 2 large men in dark suits immediately approached. Escort Miss Montgomery out of the building. She is no longer welcome here. Clarissa shrieked, finally finding her voice. Harrison, what are you doing? I'm your fiancé. He didn't raise his voice, but the finality in his tone was devastating. We were engaged, Clarissa, he corrected her, looking down at her with cold disappointment. I watched you assault 2 service staff and then threaten this woman who had the courage to intervene. We are done. Effective immediately. He turned to Patricia, the manager, who was completely overwhelmed. Patricia, I apologize for the behavior of my former fiancé, Harrison stated, pulling out his wallet and extracting a stack of $100 bills, thick enough to make anyone pause. He handed the first stack directly to Jenny. This is for immediate expenses, medical bills, and lost wages, he said simply. He handed another equally large stack to Patricia. This is for the disruption and for the damage to your uniform. Please accept my deepest apology. He didn't stop there. He then looked at the security team. Call the police. I want a full report filed against Miss Montgomery for assault against restaurant employees, witnessed by myself and dozens of patrons. The security footage must be preserved for police evidence. Clarissa attempted to claw at his arm, shouting about her family's lawyers, but the security guard smoothly and firmly took hold of her, ushering her toward the main doors. Her threats vanished down the hallway, leaving only the ringing silence in their wake. Harrison turned back to the center of the room. Jenny and Patricia were weeping, overwhelmed not just by the compensation, but by the sheer, sudden justice delivered by a man who had no obligation to them. The patrons slowly started to sit down, the tension easing as the drama was resolved. He looked around the dining room, then his gaze returned unerringly to me. I could feel Sophie gripping my hand again, hiding behind my skirt, but her terror had eased, replaced by wide-eyed confusion and a flicker of admiration. Harrison took a slow, deliberate step toward me. He ignored the mess, the money, the broken engagement. He focused only on the person who had stood up to the cruelty. I am Harrison Cole, he said, his voice calm now, without the cold business edge. His eyes held genuine respect, something I hadn't seen directed at me by a powerful man, perhaps ever. I need to apologize to you personally for Clarissa's behavior. I failed to see what she truly was. But more importantly, he paused, looking directly into my eyes, I need to thank you. That was the bravest thing I have seen in a long time. He gestured to a quiet, empty table near the bar. Would you do me the favor of speaking with me? Just for a moment. I looked at the table Harrison gestured toward, then at Sophie, whose eyes were still wide and tracking Clarissa's furious departure with the police. Lucy was already ushering Sophie toward the front door, promising ice cream. I knew I should leave, should run back to the small comfort of my own world, but the intensity in Harrison Cole's gaze kept me anchored. He wasn't looking at me like I was a problem or a spectacle. He was looking at me like I was the only honest thing in the room. I sat across from him. The light from the expensive chandelier felt too bright on my skin. He didn't try to make excuses for Clarissa. He just looked tired. "Thank you for agreeing to stay," he said, leaning forward. "I know you are exhausted." "I don't usually get invited to sit down in places like this," I replied, the truth coming out sharp and clean. "I'm usually clearing the dishes in places like this." He gave a slow, genuine nod. "I imagine you are very busy. You protected 2 women today without hesitation, and you risked a lot doing it." "I risked nothing I haven't already lost," I countered, feeling the bitterness of the last decade rise up. The abuse I saw today, that entitled cruelty. I promised myself a long time ago I would never witness that and stay silent again. Harrison didn't push for details. He simply accepted the statement as fact. I explained briefly the reality of my life: 2 jobs, daycare costs, working nights at the cafe and weekends cleaning offices, just trying to keep the electricity on. I didn't ask for help. I just laid out the math of survival. He listened without pity, only respect. When the waiter brought him a water, Harrison thanked him by name. That small detail struck me more than his tailored suit. "Naomi," he said finally, using my name easily. "If you ever need anything at all, please call this number." He slid a matte black card across the polished wood. It wasn't a corporate line. It was a personal cell number. "I mean it. Your integrity is rare." I took the card, feeling the smooth edge under my thumb, unsure if it was a promise or a courtesy. I stood up, feeling the weight of the evening settle on my shoulders, and walked out into the cool night air to find Sophie and Lucy. The encounter had felt like a battle won, but the real war, the one against poverty and the memory of abuse, was still raging. 3 days later, the war found me again, disguised as a polite smile and a termination form. I was finishing my shift at the Daily Grind Cafe, wiping down the sticky counter, when the manager, Brenda, pulled me into the small back office. Brenda wouldn't look at me. Her hands trembled as she placed a piece of paper on the desk. "Naomi, I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "I have to let you go. Effective immediately." My stomach seized. "Why? I've been here 3 years. My record is clean." "There was a complaint," she stammered, pointing vaguely to the paper. "The owner received a detailed report. Theft of inventory and workplace assault." I stared at the paper, reading the fabricated details. Aggressive behavior, threatening management, stealing expensive coffee beans. The timing, the blatant lies. I knew instantly who was behind it. Clarissa hadn't forgotten. She had simply waited until I was back on my own turf to strike. "This is not true, Brenda. This is retaliation," I insisted, my voice tight. Brenda shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "I know it isn't you, Naomi, but they threatened a major lawsuit. They sent legal documents. They said they would sue the cafe out of existence if they kept you. I can't fight them. I have kids too." The reality hit me with the force of a physical blow. Not only was I fired from my most stable job, but I had been branded a criminal. I walked out of the office in a daze, the smell of roasted coffee suddenly sickening. When I got home, the damage had spread. The internet was alight. Clarissa hadn't stopped at the cafe. She had launched a full-scale character assassination. Anonymous blogs, likely paid for, were running high-resolution photos of me taken from social media, overlaid with hateful captions. Comment sections exploded with venom. I was called a low-life opportunistic gold digger, a social climber trying to extort money from the Cole family, and unstable trash who attacked an innocent high society woman. They had twisted the story of the restaurant Confrontation completely, presenting me as the aggressor. The sheer coordination was terrifying. I was cancelled, smeared, and financially ruined within hours. My second job, cleaning offices, called shortly after, citing negative press that reflects poorly on our corporate image. I sat in my tiny dark living room, watching the comments stack up. This was the same feeling I had suffered under my in-laws. The complete erasure of my voice, the feeling of being crushed by a boot I couldn't even see. Clarissa wasn't just powerful. She was weaponizing her wealth to destroy my life, piece by careful piece. Tears blurred my vision, but I wiped them away quickly. Sophie was asleep in the next room. I could not be silent again. I remembered the black card tucked into my purse. It felt ridiculous to call a man like Harrison Cole, a man who probably had 100 people managing his social interactions, but I was drowning. I dialed the number. It rang once. "Hello." Harrison answered, his voice crisp and clear, as if he expected the call. I took a deep breath, trying to control the ragged edge in my voice. "Mr. Cole, it's Naomi. I'm sorry to bother you. I need to tell you what Clarissa has done." I recounted the firing, the false claims, and the devastating online campaign. There was silence on the line while he processed the data. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped, becoming colder, harder. It was the sound of true power, unconcerned with niceties. "I see," he stated. "She thinks she can destroy you by proxy. That ends now, Naomi." He didn't waste time on empathy. He shifted immediately into command mode. "I am sending you a secure link right now. Copy and paste every single defamatory comment, article, and social media post you can find into that document. Our legal team is filing a temporary injunction first thing tomorrow morning against every platform hosting these lies. My PR team is already monitoring the hashtag traffic. This is no longer a personal spat. This is corporate warfare." I felt a rush of stunned relief. But what can you do against that much money and control? Naomi, her family's wealth is significant, but it is heavily leveraged. And my company holds several key software contracts with their primary manufacturing branch. Contracts worth billions over the next decade. His tone was ice. When they see those contracts dissolving within the next 24 hours due to moral misconduct by a principal family member, Clarissa will cease to be their priority. She will become their liability. He paused, then delivered the final, most satisfying detail. "And tonight, the security footage from Lumiere will be released to 2 key, trusted news outlets. Unedited, time-stamped, showing the full truth. The spilled water, the slap on Jenny, the abuse of Patricia, and your defense. The court of public opinion is volatile, but it respects hard evidence." "Harrison, don't thank me," he cut in. "You don't owe me anything." Clarissa made a mistake. She thought she was attacking a defenseless cleaner. She attacked someone I respect, and now she will see the cost of that error. "Just focus on Sophie. We handle the rest." The backlash was swift and seismic. Clarissa's carefully constructed world of entitlement shattered in less than 48 hours. When the raw, brutal footage from Lumiere hit the digital sphere, the reaction was explosive. Seeing Clarissa's arrogant face contort into venom, watching her casually slap the young waitress, and then tearing the manager's uniform, it was horrifying. And then there was me, rising up out of the corner, standing tall and delivering the measured strike of justice. The public narrative flipped instantly. The smears against me dissolved under the weight of visual evidence. People recognized the universal experience of dealing with a bully. The hashtag Justice for Jenny trended globally. Clarissa went from glamorous socialite to pathological abuser overnight. The collateral damage was immense. As Harrison promised, the multi-billion-dollar contracts pulled from her family's firm caused immediate, public financial turmoil. They issued a swift, humiliating public statement distancing themselves from Clarissa, claiming she was suffering a mental health crisis. The immediate result was that she was neutered, stripped of the power structure that enabled her cruelty. Harrison's support wasn't purely destructive, however. He called Jenny first, who was still reeling from the assault. He offered her a position in his corporate HR training department, a job with full benefits, stable hours, and far better pay, promising a safe environment. Patricia, the manager, received a similar offer, being slotted into a logistics management role within one of his charitable foundations. They were thrilled, safe, and justly compensated. A few days later, Harrison showed up at my small apartment. He didn't wear a suit. He wore a simple jacket and carried a large pizza box. He didn't need to talk about the lawsuits or the trending hashtags. He was simply checking in, demonstrating a quiet, consistent concern. Sophie, shy at first, was captivated by him. He didn't talk down to her. He discussed space facts and helped her build a truly ridiculous tower out of blocks. He helped me carry groceries up the 3 flights of stairs without comment. He didn't offer a handout. He offered presence and assistance, treating my struggle not as a problem to be solved with money, but as a life to be respected. He was genuine. And for the first time in years, surrounded by the smell of cheap takeout pizza and the sound of Sophie's laughter, I felt like I wasn't fighting the world alone anymore. The shift happened slowly. Weeks turned into a month, marked by consistent, unostentatious reliability. Harrison continued to show up, not with grand romantic gestures, but with routine support. He fixed the bathroom cabinet door. He remembered Sophie's favorite flavor of ice cream. It was this quiet, steady presence, this refusal to treat my life as a problem to be solved with a check, that finally cracked the thick wall I had built around my past. One cold Tuesday night, Sophie was sound asleep. We were sitting at my cramped kitchen table, cluttered with takeout containers. I had been attempting to tell a funny story about a terrible catering job, and the memory of my mother-in-law yelling at me for dropping a glass bottle slipped out, catching my voice in my throat. I instantly felt shame, wishing I could pull the memory back. It was worse than just yelling, wasn't it? Harrison asked, his voice low and steady. He had stopped wiping down the counter. He didn't push or prod. He simply gave me the space to speak. I looked down at the chipped ceramic table, tracing a crack with my finger. The word garbage still burned in my mind, even 10 years later. I started talking, and once the dam broke, the story rushed out. Details I had never shared with anyone, not even Lucy. I told him about the forced isolation, the checks they withheld from my own accounts, the way they convinced my weak husband that I was only fit for cleaning their massive house. I told him about the constant threat of violence, the times my father-in-law pushed me against the walls, and the specific, calculated humiliation that had become their daily routine. I finished the story by whispering the final insult. The moment they threw me out after the funeral, they said I was disposable, that I had served my purpose, and now they could finally have their son back, even though he was already dead. Harrison didn't flinch. He didn't pity me. He slid his hand across the table and covered mine, his grip firm and warm. They were wrong, Naomi. Every word of it. You are the strongest person I have ever met. His quiet conviction gave the words a weight they had never carried before. I needed that acknowledgement, the solid knowledge that someone finally saw the full truth of the fight I had been in. 3 weeks after that confession, life felt strangely solid. But the past never stays buried quietly when opportunity knocks. It was a clear Sunday morning. I was making Sophie pancakes when the relentless, aggressive knocking started. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a demand, insistent and rude. I froze instantly. I knew that sound. It was the sound of my history arriving to collect a debt. I opened the door to see my former mother-in-law, Mrs. Stern, and father-in-law, Mr. Stern. They were dressed in their usual expensive, suffocating fabrics, but their faces were stretched into horrifying fake smiles. The gold watch on Mr. Stern's wrist reflected the harsh morning sun. Naomi. Oh, darling, Mrs. Stern chirped, attempting to step past the threshold, treating my tiny space like a doorway to a utility closet. She smelled of expensive perfume and sharp opportunism. We've been so worried about you and little Sophie. Stop right there, I said, blocking the doorway with my body. My voice was steady, surprisingly calm. Mr. Stern stepped forward, his eyes already scanning the living room behind me, undoubtedly looking for signs of the wealthy man he had read about in the business columns. We saw the news. A terrible misunderstanding with that rich girl. We know you can get emotional. But we are family. We wanted to see Sophie. Sophie, hearing their voices, peeked around my leg, sensing the sudden tension. The sight of her grandparents, the people who had spent her first year calling me trash and attempting to isolate me, triggered a cold, protective rage that dissolved any lingering fear. You lost the right to call yourselves family the minute you threw a traumatized, grieving widow onto the street. I stated plainly, my eyes fixed on Mrs. Stern. You don't care about me. You don't care about Sophie. You only care about what you think Harrison Cole can give you. Mrs. Stern's smile vanished completely. replaced by the familiar, cold snarl I remembered from 1,000 miserable mornings. Watch your tone, girl. We are her legal grandparents. We need to discuss access. And besides, we need to know that man is treating you right. We can provide stability that your 2 minimum wage jobs never could. Mr. Stern suddenly shoved his heavy shoulder against the door. We're coming in, Naomi. Don't be stupid. Fear tightened my chest, a terrible memory of the brick wall hitting my back years ago. I struggled to hold the door frame, but he was powerful and intent. Just as the gap widened enough for him to force his heavy body through, a deep, resonant voice cut through the aggression. I wouldn't recommend that. The Sterns froze instantly mid-push. Harrison Cole stood at the top of the stairs, having silently climbed the 3 flights. He wasn't wearing a suit, but he radiated an authority that made the air feel thin and cold. He hadn't announced his arrival. He was just there, a silent guardrail against the past. Mr. Stern straightened quickly, trying to puff out his chest and adopt an air of offended dignity, but the effect was pathetic in front of a real power broker. Mr. Cole, we are simply mediating a family issue. This woman is hysterical and attempting to keep our granddaughter away from us. Harrison stepped directly between them and me, physically blocking them. He didn't raise his voice, which only made his words cut deeper. I am aware of the family history, Mr. Stern. Naomi has been very open with me. He paused, letting the implication sink in. I had shared everything. I know about the verbal abuse. I know you called her garbage. I know about the financial manipulation. And I know about the physical assaults in your hallway on February 12, 2015, and the night you finally threw her out after the funeral. The Sterns went instantly pale. Harrison was reciting their crimes like dates on a police report, details they thought were buried forever. You are not here to mediate, Harrison continued, his eyes locked on the terrified mother-in-law. You are here because you are greedy opportunists who think my presence here means my money is accessible through a 6-year-old girl. You are mistaken. Harrison reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and raised it slightly so the red recording light was visible. I am recording this interaction, and I have a clear visual of Mr. Stern attempting to illegally force his way into this private residence. If either of you contacts Naomi or Sophie again for any reason, I will instruct my legal team to file immediate criminal harassment and restraining order charges. We will use every detail of your documented history of abuse and Naomi's sworn testimony in court. Harrison didn't have to yell. His certainty was a solid weight. The mother-in-law sputtered, completely defeated. They knew they couldn't fight this kind of power backed by genuine care and knowledge, not just cash. Mr. Stern looked wildly around, realized the fight was utterly lost, and yanked his wife by the arm. Come on, let's go. This isn't worth it. They turned and stumbled down the stairs, their expensive shoes scraping on the cheap linoleum, their humiliation total and public. The sound of their heavy retreat was the sweetest silence I had ever heard. The door clicked shut behind them. Sophie, though she hadn't understood the legal jargon, had understood the threat and was clutching my skirt, whimpering softly. Then my knees gave out. I didn't fall completely because Harrison caught me instantly. He guided me back into the living room, sitting me down hard on the worn sofa. I wasn't just crying. I was shaking violently, the kind of deep internal tremor that comes after years of holding yourself rigid against a constant, paralyzing threat. I buried my face in my hands, sobbing for the young woman who had been called garbage, for the decade I had lived in fear, and for the loss of a husband who was too weak to ever stand up for me. The tears tasted metallic, heavy with 10 years of suppressed pain finally pouring out. Harrison didn't try to stop the crying or offer trivial solutions. He didn't try to fix it. He simply sat beside me, his arm wrapping around my shoulders, anchoring me to the safety of the present moment. He held me while the trauma, finally unburdened by the need to fight, flowed out of my body. It felt like an exorcism. The fight at the restaurant had been about proving I wasn't garbage to Clarissa. But the confrontation just now, with the in-laws, had been Harrison standing up for the damaged version of me that my abusers had tried to create. He hadn't just protected Sophie's future. He had validated my past suffering. After what felt like an hour, the violent sobs subsided into shaky, exhausted breaths. I leaned against him, completely empty, the good kind of empty, where something toxic has finally left the body and left room for something clean. Thank you. I whispered into his shirt, the words raw and quiet. You never have to be silent again, Naomi, he said, his voice a promise. And you never have to face them alone. In that small, quiet apartment, surrounded by the remnants of my difficult old life, I finally allowed myself to believe that the long, dark chapter was truly closed. The process of healing had finally begun. The process of healing was not a sudden explosion, but a quiet, slow unfolding, like the careful peeling back of layers of scar tissue. With the in-laws finally banished and Clarissa's toxic influence neutralized, the heavy weight that Naomi had carried for years began to lift. Harrison was meticulous in how he approached the new dynamic. He had spent years in a world where every gesture was performative and every interaction transactional. Now, he deliberately stripped away the opulence. He wasn't trying to buy his way into their lives. He was earning his way in. He never suggested moving them into a penthouse or replacing their modest furniture. Instead, he simply showed up. He started small. On Saturday mornings, he drove his reliable, unpretentious SUV, not a flashy sports car, and helped Naomi carry bags of groceries up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment. He learned where she hid the spare key. He fixed the dripping kitchen sink and replaced a faulty light switch that had been buzzing for 6 months. He didn't hire staff for these chores. He did them himself, demonstrating reliability and grounding. For Sophie, Harrison wasn't an intimidating billionaire. He was Uncle Harrison, the tall man who knew how to make pancakes shaped like cartoon characters, and who had an endless supply of patience for board games. He listened when Sophie talked about her kindergarten struggles, treating her small concerns with genuine respect. He never tried to replace her father, but he stepped easily into the space of consistent, gentle masculine presence that had been missing. They spent time doing things that cost nothing but attention. Long afternoons at the public library, picnics in the city park, and teaching Sophie how to throw a baseball. Naomi watched him closely during these simple hours. She saw the genuine light in his eyes when Sophie laughed, a light that she knew was entirely absent when he spoke about his corporate life. She realized his rescue of her had been a rescue of himself, too. He was escaping the gilded cage of expectation. As the weeks blurred into months, the casual term Uncle Harrison began to feel strained. One evening, for months after the Lumiere incident, Sophie was drawing at the kitchen table while Naomi and Harrison discussed an upcoming nonprofit board meeting. Sophie looked up, setting her crayon down with solemn focus. "Mommy," Sophie said, her voice small and clear. "When are you going to marry Uncle Harrison so he can stay here all the time?" Naomi's breath hitched. She looked at Harrison, whose eyes were wide and open, holding her gaze across the table. "Honey, that's a big question," Naomi managed, forcing a smile. "We are just friends." "No, you're not," Sophie insisted, returning to her drawing. "He's my dad now." The statement hung in the air, heavy with unsolicited truth. Naomi couldn't speak, but the fierce loyalty and genuine desire in Sophie's words were the greatest endorsement either of them could receive. Harrison reached across the table and covered Naomi's hand. His grip was firm, reassuring. "I would like to stay here all the time, Sophie," he answered softly, not looking away from Naomi. "But it's up to your mom." That night, alone after Sophie was asleep, Naomi and Harrison talked for hours, not about Clarissa or the in-laws or trauma, but about the future. They talked about mortgages, shared finances, balancing their vastly different worlds, and most importantly, the enormous responsibility of parenting. Naomi needed to know he wasn't just attracted to her courage. He needed to be committed to the gritty reality of her life. Harrison told her how watching her rise up in the restaurant had changed everything. He saw his own integrity reflected in her defiant refusal to be silenced. He saw strength that his wealth had stripped from him long ago. He hadn't just admired her. He had fallen deeply, completely in love with the woman who understood struggle and still chose kindness. By the 6-month anniversary of their chaotic introduction, the shift felt complete. The city, which had once felt antagonistic, now felt manageable. Naomi was thriving, working fewer hours thanks to Harrison's quiet support, and finding time to pursue her education. Harrison planned the day meticulously. It wasn't a trip to Paris or a reservation at a private island. He took them an hour outside the city to a quiet stretch of coastline, a place known for its wide, windswept beaches and the clean scent of salt air. Sophie, clad in bright rubber boots, was ecstatic. She spent the afternoon racing the waves, shrieking with laughter as the icy foam rushed up to her ankles. Harrison helped her build a magnificent, sprawling sandcastle city, complete with seaweed flags. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in fiery orange and deep violet, Sophie declared her kingdom complete and, exhausted, demanded hot chocolate. Harrison pulled a small thermal flask from his backpack and handed Sophie a steaming cup, directing her toward a piece of driftwood a little way down the beach. "Go protect your fortress, Your Majesty," he instructed gently. "I need to talk to your mother." Naomi watched Sophie dutifully march away, feeling a flutter of nerves she hadn't experienced since she was a teenager. The wind whipped her hair around her face. "It's cold," Naomi said, pulling her scarf tighter. "It is," Harrison agreed. He walked closer, his warmth shielding her from the breeze. He looked out at the churning gray ocean for a moment, gathering his thoughts, before turning back to face her fully. "I know this is fast," he started, his voice steady but low. "I know our beginning was a catastrophe, but everything in my life before that night felt like a lie. You and Sophie, you are the only real thing I have ever known." He reached into the pocket of his heavy coat. He didn't drop to one knee, the wet sand made that impossible, but he held the small, square box between them. When he opened it, Naomi saw a simple antique gold band holding one clear, brilliant diamond. It was elegant, heavy, and quiet, nothing like the ostentatious jewelry Clarissa would have demanded. "This is not about money, Naomi," he continued, holding the ring steady. "This is about stability. This is about building a life that is honest and safe. I love you and I love Sophie. I love the strength you showed, and I love the tenderness you only show us." His eyes were intensely focused on hers, carrying the weight of his commitment. "I want to marry you, Naomi," he said. "I want to be your husband. But more than that, I am asking for the job of being Sophie's father. I want to be the man who shows up every day, who fixes the sinks, who builds the sandcastles, who protects her, and who teaches her that she is safe and loved. Will you let me?" Tears gathered instantly in Naomi's eyes, blurring the edges of the setting sun. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the affirmation that her choice to fight had led to the ultimate reward: peace, security, and true partnership. He wasn't offering her a palace, he was offering her an anchor. "Yes," she whispered, a fierce, relieved certainty running through her veins. "Yes, Harrison. We built this life together. And yes, I accept the anchor." Harrison let out a shaky breath, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It felt immediately right, a solid weight where only stress and worry had rested before. He pulled her close, kissing her deeply, the taste of salt and relief mixing in the cold air. When they separated, they looked down the beach toward the small figure guarding her fortress. Sophie, sensing the moment, dropped her thermos and sprinted toward them, her rubber boots kicking up sand. "What did you say, Mommy?" Sophie demanded, arriving breathless. Naomi knelt down, showing Sophie the sparkling ring. "I said yes, sweetheart." Sophie threw her small arms around Harrison's legs in a tight embrace, burying her face into his jeans. "You promised," Sophie mumbled into the denim. "You promised you'd stay here all the time." Harrison bent down, scooping Sophie up into his arms alongside Naomi, holding them both tight against the chill of the evening, and the promise of their new future. "I always keep my promises," Harrison vowed. "Always." 3 months after that simple, honest promise made on the cold sand, Naomi and Harrison stood together, their hands clasped. The world had shifted, settling into a new equilibrium. Their wedding was not the media spectacle many expected of a tech billionaire. It was held in the small, sun-dappled courtyard of the house they had bought together, a house that felt like a home, not a fortress. The air smelled of jasmine and fresh linen. Naomi wore a dress that was elegant but understated, a soft ivory color that finally felt right against her skin. She watched Harrison waiting for her by the arbor, not with the anxiety she used to feel around her first marriage, but with a profound, bone-deep certainty. He was simple in his sincerity, grounded in the belief that integrity mattered more than image. Sophie, dressed in a tiny pink tulle dress, was the official ring-bearer, clutching the silk cushion with grave seriousness. She moved carefully down the short aisle, her eyes fixed on Harrison. When she reached him, she didn't hand over the rings immediately. Instead, she leaned in and whispered something that made Harrison's serious face break into a wide, genuine smile. The guest list was small, intimate, and meaningful. Lucy dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, muttering about how she always knew Naomi deserved this. And then there were the others, the women who had been right there in the fire with Naomi on that terrible night at the restaurant. Jenny, no longer the terrified, nervous young waitress, stood near the front. She looked confident, wearing a smart tailored suit. Harrison, true to his word, had invested heavily in her future. She hadn't just accepted a job at his corporate office. She had used the financial security and the business mentoring he provided to launch her own specialty catering company. She was already landing major events, including providing the appetizers for this small wedding. Patricia, the former restaurant manager whose uniform Clarissa had torn, stood next to Jenny. She was now the general manager of one of Harrison's smaller, high-end hospitality ventures. Her posture was straight, her expression calm. The look Patricia exchanged with Naomi spoke volumes. Gratitude for the rescue, and pride in the fight they had won together. "You look amazing," Patricia said softly to Naomi just before the ceremony started, her voice firm and clear, a testament to her restored authority. "Thank you for showing us how to stand up for ourselves. You stood up for yourselves the minute you walked away from that abuse," Naomi replied, squeezing Patricia's arm. "I just helped clear the way." As the short, powerful vows were exchanged, vows built on respect, honesty, and a shared commitment to protect the vulnerable, Naomi felt the final remnants of the old chains dissolving. Her past was not just behind her. It had been dismantled piece by painful piece. While the ceremony celebrated new beginnings, the background noise confirmed the final, grim end of the conflict. The Montgomery family business, unable to weather the triple storm of public scandal, Harrison's strategic contract withdrawals, and a catastrophic loss of investor confidence, had formally collapsed. Clarissa's father, stripped of his power and reputation, issued a terse, humiliating public statement admitting culpability for unspecified corporate mismanagement. The truth that their empire was built on a culture of moral negligence was now painfully clear to everyone. Clarissa's reign of cruelty had ended not with a bang, but with a crushing financial silence. She was now just a footnote in a business obituary. For Naomi, the real victory wasn't financial security or revenge. It was the ability to take control of her own narrative. Supported and encouraged by Harrison, she didn't just settle into her new life. She pushed forward. She returned to college, finishing the degree she had abandoned years ago when she was forced into her first miserable marriage. But the degree was only the starting point for her true goal. Working out of a quiet corner of their home office, Naomi spent months laying the groundwork for a nonprofit organization. She called it the Voice Project. Its mission was specific: to provide immediate legal and psychological support for service workers and women trapped in abusive or humiliating employment situations by wealthy, entitled employers. It focused on the subtle, often ignored, emotional and economic abuse that was rarely classified as violence but destroyed lives just the same. "We help them find their voice before they shatter," Naomi explained to Harrison late one night, sitting at her desk, surrounded by legal binders. Harrison watched her, admiring the fierce concentration in her eyes. "It's remarkable, Naomi. Most people who get out of a hole just want to forget it existed. You're building a ladder for everyone else." "I can't forget what it felt like to be called garbage every day," she responded, tapping a pen against a binder labeled Emotional Abuse Litigation. "I can't forget what it felt like to know the law wouldn't touch my in-laws because they were rich. The Voice Project changes that. We go after them. We show those who think their money is a shield that the law applies to them too." She had built a network of lawyers willing to work pro bono or at drastically reduced rates, and Harrison naturally provided the foundational seed funding, but he insisted the management and direction had to remain entirely hers. This organization was her legacy, forged in the ashes of her pain. The work was hard, emotional, and draining, but every success story, every time a waitress or a domestic worker or a young employee stood up to her abuser using the resources Naomi provided, recharged her. It solidified the fact that her struggle had served a greater purpose. Years passed, bringing quiet joy and steady growth. Sophie grew taller, a beautiful, sensitive child who knew the meaning of kindness and the value of courage. She was thriving under the unconditional love of her mother and the solid, consistent presence of Harrison, who was now unequivocally her father. Naomi often found herself watching Sophie play, reflecting on the sharp, violent twist of fate that had brought her here. She had been beaten down, abused and silenced for years by people who saw her as less than human. She had lived in fear, believing she had to accept humiliation just to survive. But that night at Lumiere, when Clarissa raised her hand against Jenny, everything broke open. Naomi had realized then that remaining silent in the face of injustice wasn't protection. It was participation in her own continued trauma. She had stood up not just for Jenny or Patricia, but for the terrified 20-year-old version of herself still trapped inside the abusive home. She had fought back for Sophie, ensuring her daughter would never mistake silence for strength. The greatest lesson she ever taught Sophie was not in a classroom or a textbook, but in that moment of explosive courage, that dignity is non-negotiable, that every voice matters, and that sometimes the absolute worst moments of your life are the precise launchpad you need to find your strength and start the best chapter you've ever known. Now we want to know what you thought. From 0 to 10, what score does this story deserve?